Before we move any deeper into JavaScript, we want to start using an external JavaScript file because that is the best way to utilize your JavaScript code. And that is the way most websites do that. Now, similar to the CSS series, we are going to create a website folder where we'll keep all of our website code, and we'll call that simply website. And we're going to use the HTML code from the second video. I think that was on statements. So let's just move that into here, and let's open that folder now. And now let's create our JavaScript file. It'll be empty in the beginning, but then we'll populate it with a couple instructions. So let's go ahead and just make a simple text document. Let's open that up. And then what you want to do is save that as a .js file. So we're going to call this test.js. And then you want to select all files and make sure this is ANSI right here. And then we'll hit save. And there you can see we've got our nice little JavaScript file now. And we can delete our original text file. And then let's just go ahead and open this up with Notepad, and we'll just size this over here. And let's go ahead and open up our web page. And there is the JavaScript that we created from the second video. And we're just going to reuse this. This isn't a tutorial about creating JavaScript code. It's about actually using an external JavaScript file. So let's just put in something different, just to be different. And let's just say we are now using a JS file, something like that. Now, all we have to do is copy the instruction. We don't need the script tags because this is just a JavaScript file. So we just copy and paste that over here, and we end the statement with a semicolon as we always do. And so we can go ahead and get rid of this now. But we need to specify it in our HTML, our external JavaScript file. So let's get rid of this angle bracket, and we will use the source attribute. By the way, this is the same process for an external CSS sheet, the same idea. So let's point to that file, and again, it's test.js, and we will close it with another angle bracket. Let's save this. Oops, we need to save our JS file first. And let's save our Notepad file here. And then let's again open this up in Notepad++. Let's run this in Chrome. And there you can see we are now using a JavaScript file. So let's close that out. Let's close everything out now. And now we've got our folder. Now there are two main reasons that you want to use a JavaScript file. The first is that we do not want to unnecessarily clutter our HTML page because it will become unreadable. And again, that is similar to why you would use a CSS external style sheet. The other reason is that a lot of our JavaScript code will be used by other web pages. So it makes sense to share that among all of our web pages rather than having to retype that out for every web page. That's just kind of a pain. So it makes sense again to create an external file that we can use over and over again throughout all of our web pages. Okay, that's going to do it for this video. I will see you guys in the next video. In this video, we're going to take a preliminary look at functions. And actually, we're going to spend the next several videos examining functions because they really are the key to understanding JavaScript. And so we've got our JS file open here in Notepad, as well as our web page.html that we've been working on. So let's flip back to our JavaScript file. And as I said, functions really are an important part of JavaScript, along with variables. They form the basic blocks of JavaScript. Now, functions are simply a set of statements that we group together that perform a particular task or function. And really, it's a way of organizing your JavaScript code. You wouldn't want to have hundreds of statements all over the place because it would become unreadable. Functions are not only a way to organize your code, but also reuse your code over and over again. Because it makes sense that if you do one particular function on one part of your web page, you may need to use that function over and over again. So that's really what it's all about, reusing your code. And so you can put one statement in a function or multiple statements. And in this video, we're just going to do a very simple function to get us started. Now, to identify a function, we simply type in the JavaScript keyword function, and that identifies it as a function to JavaScript. So let's do that. And then you can name the function whatever you want. So that's similar to a variable. You can call it whatever you want. Now, like a variable, I recommend that you name it something relevant. In other words, whatever that function does. So we're simply going to call this function say something. Now I should point out that the naming convention for functions is very similar to variables. You can pretty much use any naming convention you want, but you cannot put numbers in front of the function. So if we put an 88 in front of this, it will not work, and you can see the IntelliSense turns our name to red. That will not work. So that's really the main caveat about naming functions. So let's get rid of that 88. Now after the name, we need an opening and closing parenthesis, and this is where we pass data into our function. And we're going to talk about that in the next video. But for now, we're just going to leave this empty. But again, if we want to pass data into our function, we use the parenthesis. And again, we'll talk about that in the next video. Okay, so after the parenthesis, we need curly braces. And this is where everything gets going in terms of the function. All of the statements that we create will go inside these curly braces. And so let's put a comment in there. All statements go inside curly braces. Okay, now let's create a statement for this function. And we're just going to do a simple alert. And we need our parenthesis. And then we're just going to send a string. And we'll say this is a function. Nice, short, sweet, and simple. And then, of course, as always, we need to close the statement out with a semicolon. Now, the key point here and what differentiates a function from just a normal statement is that the function by itself will do nothing. We actually have to call this function in order for it to run. So again, if we don't call this, nothing happens on our web page. So in order to call this, we simply have to go outside the function and type in the function name, and we just put in parenthesis here, semicolon, and let's save this, and let's go over to our web page. And let's run this, and there we get the alert. This is a function. Now, I will say JavaScript is all about tying functions to events. We will get to events much later on, but at a basic level, that's what you're doing in JavaScript. You're tying a function to a particular event. So it could be a mouse click, it could be a keyboard stroke, it could be playing a video on a website. Anything and everything is open game to make your site interactive. So as I said, that's really the key, the basic key to understanding JavaScript. You're simply tying functions to events. And as I said, we will get to that much later on. But I just wanted to make that point early on. Now in the next video, we're going to talk about these parentheses and passing data through here. So I will see you guys in the next video. Okay, we are continuing on from the last video where we were talking about functions. In this video, we're going to expand upon functions, and we're going to talk about the opening and closing parenthesis. Now, as I said in the last video, this is where we pass data or information into our function, and then we can do whatever we want with that data. We can multiply it, we can subtract it, we can divide it. Anything is open game. And so let's actually change our function name because we're going to add some data in this function. So let's change this to add something so it's a little bit more relevant. And then we're going to create the parameters that we're going to use. Now, these are called parameters, but they're actually variables because they will actually hold the data that gets used by our function. The only difference is we don't use the var keyword. We can actually just write out the name of a variable. I like to think of it more as a placeholder. It's kind of a temporary placeholder where it just holds the data that gets passed into our function. And then, as I said, our statements will work against whatever data the variables in this parenthesis are holding. So we're going to do multiple parameters here. Now you can do one parameter, you can do two parameters, you can do as many parameters as you want. You just have to put a comma between each parameter or variable. So let's call our first variable num because it is going to be a number, and we will call the second variable str because that is going to hold a string. And as I said, you could name this anything you want. It doesn't matter. You could have this 100 characters if you wanted. It does not matter. But I like to make the variable name somewhat relevant to whatever data or information it is holding. Now we'll pass in data when we call our function down here. But for now, let's go ahead and put some statements into our function. Let's get rid of this comment. And then what we're going to do is create a variable inside our function, and we're just going to simply call that add, and then we're going to say that is equal to num plus str, and then of course a semicolon. So basically this variable will add up these two variables in our parenthesis and whatever data is stored in them. And then what we're going to do is we're going to alert, and we're just going to alert on the variable name. And that, of course, is add. So we just put add in there. And now we need to actually call our function down here. And so again, this is where we pass in data to our function. So we need to obviously change the function to add something because this is the function we're calling. And let's first pass in a number because that's the first variable that we have up here for a number. And let's pass in 455. And then we need a comma, and let's pass in a string now, and we'll pass in the string programs to write. Now I have a space here because if we don't put this space here, the output would put the word programs right next to 45, and we want this to read more like a sentence. So that's why I put the space here. So again, this number is going to equate to this variable, and the variable str is going to hold this string for us. And then we have a variable inside our function that's going to add our two variables, and then we're going to, of course, alert on that variable, which of course we'll see when we open up our browser. So let's go ahead and save this, and let's flip over to our web page that references our JavaScript file, and let's run this in Chrome. And there you can see we get our sentence, 455 programs to write, and we'll hit OK to that. Now, I want to point out that this example has everything coming in. We are sending data into our function, but we can also return values from our function as well. And we'll talk about that in the next video. See you guys then.